Discover the power of one.
For most of you, General Jerry Boykin and Kamal Salim don't need any introduction. They're regular guests here. They're like family to us. They are family to us. We love and appreciate them so very much. I think the greatest thing, if you don't believe in miracles, please just look up here on the platform. And it is a true statement. General Boykin felt the call to be in the military and spent 37 years there. Counterterrorism was a huge part of that. Kamal Salim, a jihadist, raised from a young man in a large Sunni Muslim family. And his mother told him that his destiny was to die killing Christians and Jews. So what do you do when your mother's telling you at 4 years of age? These two men were sworn enemies. And had they met at the wrong time, they would have killed each other. And today they are brothers in Christ, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, and it's a beautiful thing. And John, are you going to, okay, great. John, it is so great to have you. I think it'd be great if you could tell people what you do. I know understanding the threat, but what I shared and have been sharing with the church, we're not getting the truth off what is called the mainstream media about radical Islam. I feel like I know a thimbleful of what I probably need to know, but I feel like radical Islam is playing this nation like a musical instrument. So John, can you tell us some of your background and how you ended up doing what you're doing, and then we'll get on with discussion.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate the fact you all are here. This is a joy. I am actually, for the last couple of weeks, have been traveling. I was in Arizona with a lot of law enforcement folks, training and teaching them, and then spent the last week literally going on a deep dive with a bunch of folks so they can go out and actually teach and do a little bit of what we do. So understanding the threat teaches leaders at the national, state, and local level, law enforcement, about the real threat that we face and unpacking the depth of the threat in your community. And as we'll discuss here, you have a significant threat right here in your community. And most people aren't aware of it. I grew up in Maryland. I went to the Naval Academy. I graduated in 1989, took a commission in the United States Marine Corps, the finest fighting force the world's ever known.
Now, if y'all know General Boykin, you know where this could potentially go tonight. So fair warning.
So I've known Jerry a while. So I spent about 7 years in the Marine Corps, was an infantry and reconnaissance officer, and in 1996 joined the FBI and spent about 12 and a half years as a special agent. And through a couple cases that I worked right after 9/11, came to see the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, Al-Qaeda network in the United States. And we were making a lot of mistakes inside the government. And so I started actually trying to get training and operations designed to actually go after the threat. And in the end of 2008, was recruited by the Department of Defense to do a strategic analysis of the threat. And that's where I stayed for a few years until the current administration defunded everything we were doing. And so I started in the summer of 2012, understanding the threat, specifically targeting two groups of people that I think are the most important at the local level, which is where we're going to win or lose this entire war, is sheriffs, because they're the most powerful law enforcement officers in the country, and pastors. And I'll just say this is stepping out, and then that's anybody that's been to any of my programs, you'll hear us and the team say that we have most pastors in the country not only are not speaking out against this, they actually believe that the God of Islam and the God of Christianity are the same, and they say it, one God, three Abrahamic faiths. And if you're sitting here tonight and you don't know that that's untrue, you're woefully behind the power curve. And hopefully we can help you untangle that and let you see that we have some real problems in this country. Because it's not only, if you here don't understand that and you don't understand the threat in your community, that's probably okay because you're a citizen. But we have leaders who have sworn oaths to the Constitution that don't know the threat, and for a lot of reasons, or they know the threat and aren't doing anything about it. So that's the work I do now, and we go around the country working with state leadership, local leadership, national leadership. And there is a door now opening at the national level that has not been opened since I've been doing this work, and people are asking the right questions. And I mean literally just in the last couple months. So that's at least a light. So that's it. Thank you for letting me do the intro.
Thank you, John, and thank you for what you do. I guess we could start here. There's a lot of spin when you turn on the television and stuff, but let's just start here because some people think this is people overreacting, we're being fanatical. You know, a lot of Muslims are people, peaceful Muslims. Is there a plan to destroy this nation? Is there a plan to take over this nation by Islam?
Oh, I'll start. Yes. First of all, I think we need to start with what Islam teaches. Islam comes from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. And if you just look at Muhammad, everything he did was the perfect example. So why do Muslims step into a mosque with their right foot first? Because Muhammad did. Why is it okay to marry a 7-year-old girl? Because Muhammad married a 6-year-old. Why is it okay to kill non-Muslims under certain conditions outlined? Well, because Muhammad did that. And he beheaded people himself, and he killed people. And he authorized people to be killed for slandering him. So if you want to know why Muslims go to Garland, Texas to kill people because they're having a cartoon contest, because Muhammad said that's what you're supposed to do. And the Quran said it, and he said it. He's the perfect example in everything in life. So if he did it, it's good for all time. So it's kind of as simple as that. And he said, fight and slay the unbelievers until they testify there's no God but Allah. The Quran says it, fight and slay the unbelievers wherever you find them. And since they teach it in every Islamic school on the planet, in elementary and junior high school, that should be an indicator that that's what Islam is. And I would just leave these maybe as two good starting points. In Islam, from the Quran and the Sunnah, you get the Sharia, the law that Muslims are commanded to obey. And somebody who doesn't obey the Sharia that you might know, that's not a different version of Islam. That's just somebody not obeying the Sharia. And that's what the Sharia commands. And two things that I think are important to start the discussion with is one, this part of the law. It is a capital crime in Islam for a Muslim to teach another Muslim anything about Islam that's not true, and it's obligatory for Muslims to lie to non-Muslims when the goal is obligatory. So if you want to learn about Islam, you need to not ask a Muslim. You need to look at what they are teaching each other when you're not around. And that's what I do with leadership and with law enforcement, and we use their textbooks, everything from junior high to elementary school textbooks to authoritative Islamic law, and it's all the same. And once they see that, then when we understand that there's actually a Muslim Brotherhood network in the United States, and we do have their documents that the FBI recovered that states that they're here to wage civilization jihad until this country is overthrown and Islamic law is imposed. And they lay out how they're going to do it, the organizations that they're going to create. And since the 1990s, when they published those plans, they've actually created those organizations, thousands of them here. So they're actually doing the plan that they say they're going to do in furtherance of what they say they're doing it for. And our response at the federal level is to say this problem has nothing to do with that. And so if you think we can't lose, I guess not to start out on a dark note, but from a military side looking at a war, because this is war from their perspective, I don't know how you win it if you decide to stand on the sidelines.
Well, we're Westerners. Kamal?
I was commissioned to send here. That was the plan that I was sent for. Not to be equal to you, but to rule and reign and change the culture And the way we're going to do it is by deception, to deceive the culture. The hadith by Muhammad traditions, he said, when you are weak as Muslim, laugh in the enemy's face, but curse them in your heart. But then there are thousands of young men like me that were trained specifically for something like this, and they are here as sleeping units. We came to fulfill the Great Commission of Islam. Brother John talked about it, is when Muhammad says, Inni umirtu an uqatil al-shu'ub, I've been commended by Allah to war, to destroy humanity, until everyone says there's no God but Allah, Muhammad, his prophet. But the other part that nobody talks about is, he said, if they not concede to you, you have the rights to their women, to their children, to their home, to their land, to their finances, everything they own, it is your inheritance. So when you see refugees come into the United States, just like we saw what happened in Maryland, this little boy, 3 boys raped that 5 years old girl, and they did things to her, it was unspeakable. And you see the thousands of rapes, in the Middle East, in Europe. What happened is, this is prescribed because the Quran says whatever your right hand allows you to do, it is your rights to fulfill, whether to have a slave, whether to conquer, whether to kill. So they are coming for their inheritance. So we came for our inheritance in here to establish Islamic civilization. And our way to go about it is to go after your children, after your professors, after your politicians, after your bankers, after your judicial system. This is where you establish Islamization. You don't go to the people, you go to the high places where the mountains of influence can affect the nation. So we steer the nation from the top, and this is what the Muslim Brotherhood does.
General Boykin, your time in the military, you had to study. We played a clip from you last year promoting this, and you said in the infantry, you never go out to war without studying your enemy. What's your perspective of where the United States stands now in our threat of Islam and how well we know the enemy? From your military background, how do you see us as a nation?
Mm-hmm. First of all, look at, let me go back to a couple of things here and kind of come into this answer here. America is only less than a decade behind Europe, and if you're not aware of what's happening in Europe, you need to be. You need to go to YouTube. You need to go on the web, and you need to find out what's happening in Europe, where Europe has been willfully blind about the actuality of the threat on the continent of Europe, and now it's catching up with them. And now it's out of control. They just elected a Muslim to be the mayor of London. All of you understand that? The mayor of London now is a Muslim. Muslims are doing atrocious things all over that continent, and we are, I would have said a decade ago, now I say 5 years behind them. It's happening in America because we're making the same fundamental mistake that they made, and that is we're not calling these people what they are. We're doing the same thing in America. If you don't know your enemy, you sure can't have a strategy to defeat your enemy, and America does not face up to the realities of who the enemy is, because we don't want to offend anybody. And John said something very important, and that is that calling the enemy out ought to start right in the church with the pastors. You find another church, I challenge you to find another church that will do what we're doing right here, right now. It's not happening because the pastors are afraid they're going to offend somebody. We don't know the enemy. Oh, we do. We know the enemy. But the reality is the leadership of this nation at various levels absolutely refuses to acknowledge that we are headed in the same exact direction that Europe has gone, and we're going to wind up in exactly the same place, and it's coming fast, and that is that they're going to have a complete Islamic takeover of the continent of Europe. And all the analysts are saying it is coming quickly, that Europe is going to be an Islamic continent, and every Christian is going to be what they call a dhimmi. They're going to live as subjects to Islam. They're either going to convert or they're going to pay a tax. And it's coming to Europe. Don't think that it can't happen in America, because it is happening in America. And when I was in, right after San Bernardino, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department asked me to come out and do a leadership seminar for them. I did a half-day leadership seminar, and I sat down and talked to those sheriff's deputies. And I said, are you worried that there are other cells like the one that killed those people in San Bernardino? And they looked at me and they said, you know, those cells are all over America. It's not if it's going to happen again, it's just a matter of when it's going to happen again. Because we know they're there and we can't do anything about it. That's a lack of leadership.
I want to ask, because I've seen footage of this. There are, I think, 37 or 38 terrorist training camps in America.
35. Jamaat al-Fukra.
Would y'all explain what, my blood was boiling when I saw this. I couldn't believe it was military activity going on, but maybe any one of you explain to everybody what these terrorist training camps are.
So Jamaat al-Fukra is what they're called in Pakistan, and they're led by a guy named Sheikh Jilani, who's directly tied with Al-Qaeda at the senior levels. Here in the United States, they're called Muslims of America. So much of the training and some of the funding comes from there. But Sheikh Jilani is the guy that the reporter from the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, Daniel Pearl, went to meet and then was beheaded by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed of Al-Qaeda. So that's Sheikh Jilani, pleasant fellow. And so he sets up the MOA training camps in the United States, the Muslims of America. And for the most part, these camps are black converts, African-American converts, mostly prison converts. And they're not being taken seriously by most of them by law enforcement, although some state and local officials around the country, a few of the camps are being watched because they know it's a threat to their community. Now, not all, to my knowledge, we don't have a good number of how many of the 36 camps are active right now. But the quick story is, in the early 1990s, an FBI agent went to the state law enforcement in Colorado, said, we have an issue with a camp in Buena Vista, and here's what they're doing. It's maybe 8 miles outside of Buena Vista, 7 miles, and laid it out. And so then the state and local law enforcement put together a briefing and took it to the FBI leadership with the leadership of the state. And the FBI said, we're not going to do anything about this. Now, those are the words of the state chief investigator who was working with the governor, I think Mr. Romer at the time, if I remember correctly, and the attorney general. And, well, they said, well, we don't want these guys in our state. And the FBI refused to do anything, so they put together a multi-jurisdictional task force and raided the compound in Buena Vista and found exactly what you would expect: weapons, explosives, ammunition, lists of people to be assassinated, evidence that they had targeted the Air National Guard base and other facilities, including power facilities and stuff like that. And yet, to date, that camp, at least from my understanding, is starting to show some more activity, and there's been no FBI investigation. I know Jerry's familiar with at least a couple of the camps where he knows guys work in law enforcement, maybe a number of others, where at the federal level, they're not interested in it. I don't think across the board we're taking this threat seriously. We're treating things like San Bernardino, Orlando, and you see a pattern where the person doing it is mentally deficient. Their parents immediately say, we had no idea, even though we support Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Can't imagine how this happened. And, our leadership gets on TV, says this has nothing to do with Islam. And by the way, this is on both sides of the political aisle, folks, at the leadership level. It has nothing to do with Islam. Don't look, don't lift up any rocks and look under here. But I think this is a serious problem in these training camps.
And back to the church, I believe as the church goes, so goes the nation. And General Boykin, I wanted to talk about Chrislam because you've known it firsthand. How many's heard of Chrislam? Can I see your hands? So not the whole auditorium. Can you explain what you've encountered in churches in America and exactly what Chrislam is?
Well, we had, this really kind of probably started about 5 years ago. We had some actually very well-known mega church pastors that jumped into this thing called Chrislam, and they said, well, it's just what John said. We all worship the same God. Christianity and Islam, we worship the same God, so let's worship together. And they termed it Chrislam. They brought Muslims into the Christian churches. They read from the Quran. They read from the Bible. If you think for 1 minute that it's the same God, I agree with John. You are woefully behind the power curve. But we had big-time pastors. They got into this other thing called, what was it they called it, John? The dialogue? The
interfaith dialogue.
The interfaith dialogue. Now, according to the Quran, it is wrong, unauthorized for a Muslim to enter into a dialogue with a Christian or a Jew or any non-believers. Take not Christians and Jews for your friends, for they'll corrupt you, is basically what it says. But you got well-known, and I'm not going to call any names, but you got well-known pastors that jumped into this Chrislam thing. And what they don't understand, or if they do, they don't care, is when you bring Muslims into your church to worship, they consecrate that church as holy ground for Allah.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
This is a dangerous thing that churches and spiritual leaders are doing with this Chrislam.
And I think I'm going to kind of go all over the map tonight because there's so many things that I didn't know. Kamal, you've told us that a mosque is not just a place of worship. So what does a mosque really represent in the mind of a Muslim?
The mosque, what's referred to in the old days as Rabat. What is a Rabat? Rabat is a conquering place where it's built. It conquered a civilization where Islam is not strong or great yet. But when a mosque is built, it's an Islamic embassy. Represent the Islamic State. So its loyalty, it is not to the country that it's in, it's loyalty to the Islamic State. Number two, it's a parliament in itself. Basically, the imam is in charge and he will release to the people the understanding, the do's and the don'ts, and how to enter the civilization and how to put the propaganda, Islamic propaganda, to the people. It's like their TV screen. But when you talk about, what you asked General Jerry about how Chrislam is taking place, the uniqueness of all this, anytime when we are bringing Muslim to our church, that ground is not just holy ground, but it must be conquered. And the conquering way it has to be done is by killing the pastor and taking over his place. Why and how is it happening? They are coming to the place and they're saying, we are poor. We have no friends. It's called the Swedish syndrome. And we have no alliance in here. We need your protection. That's what they come into the pastor. The pastor, by having this father instinct, right away is protecting them. Little by little, they increase him by number from hundreds to thousands. And so therefore, now the pastor is having a service for them in his sanctuary. On Friday, they're reading from the Quran. And if you read the Quran, it's sent hexes, vexes, curses against the Christian and Jews. It declares war on the non-believers, the Christian and Jews. So what happened is they are showing him this moderate Islam versus the radical Islam. And that's what we really need to know. It's the scheme, how they entering and how they infiltrating. The same thing they're doing with the leadership. And now they are moving into our civilization, specifically the areas that Christianity is really strong, like Texas, North Carolina, and many other places like this.
Can I just add one thing, please? On this, what we're seeing around the country in the United States, is what Kamal's talking about is, you may have seen, like they're building $90, $100 million mosques in places like out west or in the middle of nowhere, where there are literally 100 Muslims. And people ask, why would they do that? Well, they're doing that because they're they're claiming the territory around that mosque, the law of sacred
It's 8
space.
square miles.
Around that mosque for Islam, and now all they have to do is occupy it. And if you see how practically they're doing it, literally what they do is they will begin going around the neighborhood with Muslim real estate agents. We've seen it all across the country. And they'll offer people that have lived in their houses for 20, 30 years more money than the value, and they'll keep upping it because most of the money is coming from either Dubai or Saudi Arabia. Most of it's Saudi Arabia, and they'll buy these houses. And once a Muslim moves into that house, a non-Muslim's never going to move in that house. If they move, they're going to sell it to another Muslim off market, which in most places is against county or state code, but no one's charging them because they don't want to offend the Muslim population. So you literally see it from the mosque branching out. They're occupying the homes and stuff around the mosque.
The Muslim don't use banking system, the American banks. They use what's called hawara. Hawara is something behind the banking system. It's behind our, it may be operating out of 7-Eleven or Mechanic Place or any of those front end of the Islamic, stores. Basically, they borrow, monies and what so have you, and the big government are involved. If you are advancing Islamization, there are big money to take that money from those places and advance and apply, and open a mosque or whatever it may be. But what you really need to pay attention to, the most important part is when they build a mosque and they build an Islamic center and they build an Islamic school, what they do, they create a triangle. This triangle, it open up, a vortex to heaven, to the second heaven, which is now they start communicating with their, gods and whatever, demons and what so have you. And so now what happened, when that happens, now they establish what's so-called no-go zone area. And so when we are bringing refugees, the refugees start coming to hide in those no-go zones area, especially those who are in ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Al-Nusra, all of them, they come to that place. Why? Because the majority of the imams are radical in their understanding. So therefore, when an imam is teaching, and if he has to teach the truth, there is no moderate imam. There is no moderate, because all of them are radical, unless they are Ahmadiyyin. Ahmadiyyin, they are a unique, chapter of the Muslim that they don't believe the entire Islam, and the Muslim must kill those people because they're an apostates. So therefore, we have to know our enemy and understand their philosophy. When they start opening this, now the no-go zoning is established, and now everybody's going to move in, and they're going to be protected in that no-go zone area.
Now, this term cultural jihad, we know when there's a violent jihadist thing, there's bloodshed. What is cultural jihad?
Cultural jihad is when people like me, when we came to the culture, to the American culture, it's a stealth methodology, which is underground. If when 9/11 took place, a lot of American people didn't even understand what Islam, everybody's wondering, what is Islam is all about? And they still have not understood what happened. Muslim Brotherhood moved here in the 1960s, early 60s. And what happened, they are establishing precept upon precept to establish Islamic civilization. The Islamic civilization, it works in a way to move into leadership of the nation, to make a presence in universities and colleges, to make their presence known when you invite them to speak. The invitation to speak, now you made them real. What happened? You have called them that you are equal to us. So they are engaged and they provoke the culture so the culture can establish them in this. So now, like what John said earlier, they have thousands fronts, and those fronts, each one represents something different. And so these people say, we are not them. We are not like them. So it's a deception. But by that time, what happened? They affect your education system. They affect your banking system. They affect your judicial system. They affect your military. They affect your government. They affect your media. They affect every level of your civilization, that now you could not do anything anymore. Why? Because you're going to offend the Muslims, and so therefore they will have to implement what's called the hate crime bill, which is you could not speak against Islam, but Islam can speak against you.
Well, and a lot of, sometimes people think, oh, this is speculation, right? Or it's just not. Well, there was the intelligence report that was done that you, I think, led, General Boykin. But there is either a 4 or a 5-phase plan, I think, that Islam.
John mentioned it earlier. It's called the Explanatory Memorandum. It's found in 2004 in Annandale, Virginia, in the basement of the guy that ultimately it was discovered was the, what would you say, operations officer for the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, and a senior Hamas guy, yeah.
Yeah. And they found this explanatory memorandum. And the book that John was part of writing that book, the book is called Sharia, the Threat. And there's a copy of it in there. And it lays out a 5-phase plan. John mentioned it vaguely earlier. It's a 5-phase plan to take over America. Now, it's broad in nature, but if you look at it, you'll say, holy mackerel, they're doing this. It's unfolding right now. Now, there are more specific plans that they have for how they're going to take over. And as Kamal said, they're going to infiltrate every element of our society, including the church. We have a friend that is a pastor in Chino Hills, California. His name is Jack Hibbs. I don't know, 6,000, 7,000 member church in Chino Hills, California. He had an associate pastor that was a Muslim convert. Turned out the guy wasn't a convert at all. He had been planted there. He'd been planted there in this church, huge mega church. That guy had been planted there. They're infiltrating every element of our society while we are trying to believe that there is a big separation between the radical Muslims and the moderate Muslims. And the reality is, John said it, the moderate Muslims are just simply Muslims that have chosen not to follow the teachings of the Quran and the Hadith. And there are a lot of them. And God bless them. I wish that more of them would refuse to follow it.
Yeah, I'd like to just, what Jerry's talking about is huge here. Among the documents that we found, in 1991, this explanatory memorandum was written and published by the number 2 guy in the Muslim Brotherhood's Palestine Committee, which is Hamas in the United States. Yeah. And it was a memorandum that was given to the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America as the strategy to how to deal with North America. Well, that next year, they published their implementation manual, which implements the strategy. And so what we have done, and a colleague of ours did, is we looked at the number of nonprofit Islamic organizations created and the year they were created, and we mapped it against their doctrine. So you see very few being created, and in 1982, 83, a whole slew of them, over 100 created by the Muslim Brotherhood, and then the number drops back down. Well, that's the very year that they created the Islamic Society of North America, which is the umbrella organization for every organization they created from the 1960s to that day. So we call that in the intelligence and law enforcement world an investigative clue that those are all hostile organizations, because it's mapped right against the creation of their continental organization, Islamic Society of North America, which, by the way, the subsidiary of that here is called the Islamic Society of Colorado Springs. Maybe you've heard of it. But anyway, not to get on a tangent, then we see the numbers come down again, literally below 12 or 11 a year, until they publish the explanatory memorandum and the implementation manual. And since that time, in 1992, they've created between 70 and about 120 nonprofits a year. And you can see across the board, it's what he's saying: media organizations, legal organizations, civil organizations, social organizations, which, by the way, is exactly what the Muslim Brotherhood bylaws tell them how to do it. So when you look at their plans and what they're actually doing at the ground level, it is absolutely right in line.
You know, go ahead, come on.
There's a book out there we have on a table. It's called Star Spangled Sharia. Star Spangled Sharia is the Sharia, the Islamic constitution, Pastor, that is going to replace the American Constitution. And what John and General Jerry did, creating a memorandum, creating a B2 report on this, on Sharia. Today we have it in that Star Spangled, and we also have another book called Sharia Law for Non-Muslims. If you want to understand what the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamization, how they're invading our culture, you need to obtain that, because that will give you clarity of understanding, and it's deeper. And I wish we had more time to go as deep as we can.
One thing, go ahead, John.
And one last thing, 2 summers ago, they created the U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations, which I've got to tell you, I've been doing this since really 2002 on the Muslim Brotherhood inside and outside the FBI, and I got to tell you, just the last 6 months of what they're doing it's impressive. And I'm sorry if that sounds glowing, but I mean, they are steamrolling us at the political level. It's the first Muslim political organization in the United States, and it is being run by the most senior Muslim Brotherhood leaders in the U.S., and it is phenomenal, and our political system is allowing it and supporting it in some cases. And what their plans are is nothing less than civilization jihad through the political network, which is exactly what Jerry and Kamal are talking about.
And I want to say, just to keep this on point, this is not to scare us, to borrow a phrase. This information is not to scare us, but to prepare us. How many of you know, if we don't know our enemy, how are we ever going to take them on? There's things that have gone on at the highest levels. I understand the Muslim Brotherhood is at the highest levels in the White House. There are many closed-door meetings President Obama's had with them that press aren't allowed to come in. And I just wanted to take this back closer to home to Colorado Springs. It was when General Boykin and Kamal were here, I think a couple of years ago, for America the Beautiful, and a local policeman here who has a heart for these kinds of things. He's a pastor now, he's in his retirement years, but he told me in the 90s, I think it's the group Al-Fuqra, am I saying that right? Okay. So in town, in the 90s in Colorado Springs, they seized a U-Storage unit in Colorado Springs. It was full of explosives, very detailed plans, weapons, bombs, and they had plans to poison our water supply, wipe out our power grid, very detailed. They even had a hit planned on an imam in Arizona. So I said to this pastor friend of mine that used to be a policeman that was on that, I said, now how in the world did I miss that? I don't remember that ever on the news. And he said the FBI put a cap on it because there were so many investigations tied to it, they wouldn't allow it to be reported because there were too many other things pending, apparently. So he said what happened was those men were finally brought to trial. I guess they're in prison. So then after some of these other things were solved or whatever they said, then they reported it. So he said it typically goes, we caught these people doing this, they've been tried, they're in prison now, so people's minds, well, you don't have to worry about that anymore. But for the life of me, I never caught wind of that. So I say that to say that Colorado Springs, this is not new. And then one of the things I saw, and I think, Kamal, you shared it with somebody, an FBI agent or a law enforcement that was talking to you, I sent you the kill list for the military men in this town in Colorado Springs because of our Air Force base, because there was the Syrian strikes. They tracked down who they thought were the pilots, and there was a kill list of our military men in Colorado Springs with their addresses and all that kind of thing. So I said all that to say this stuff is not, off on the East Coast or the West Coast or whatever. It's right here in our backyard, and it's been there a long time.
Pastor, already the fire that's starting in America, a lot of the fire, it's part of the agenda, Islamic agenda. When we see fire happening here in the mountains of Colorado, you need to listen to the fire department, what they said and what they found. How they planted the phone and the mechanism to establish the fire. In some instances, they saw Muslim came and started something in California, and so therefore, this is to exhaust the nation, to establish, to exhaust the funds, the ability, and see how the nation operate under pressure and how they can move resources from one place to another. So now it's not looked upon them. Everybody's looking at the bigger picture.
And go ahead.
Pastor, if I said to the people in this audience, this administration will not allow law enforcement to protect you, most of you would not believe me. Here's a former FBI agent. Ask him. A quick story. 2009, a guy in law enforcement called me and said, do you know anybody on the House or Senate Intelligence Committee? I said, yes, I used to testify before those committees. He said, there is a new thing out of Eric Holder called the Domestic Investigations and Operations Guidelines. And it says if you are federal law enforcement, you may not investigate suspicious activity regarding terrorism. You can do it for drugs, you can do it for money laundering, you can do it for anything, but not terrorism. So this guy said, so what's happening is the FBI and the DEA and all these other people that are now coming to local and state officials saying, can you investigate that? We can't do it, but we see what's going on. We've got all this intel and we can't do anything with it. So I actually did go and meet with 6 members of the House Intelligence Committee. I laid it out. The chairman at the time who was in the meeting was a guy named Pete Hugstra. I laid it out and he said, I've never heard of this. There is no such thing. And the good news was his chief of staff was sitting next to him with his iPhone out. It's 2009. He was doing something on his iPhone and he said, Mr. Hugstra, it's true. It was issued on the 6th of July, 2009 by Eric Holder. It was immediately challenged in a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request. The media and others wanted it, so they redacted it and gave them a copy of it to the media. It prohibits them from investigating suspicious activity with regards to terrorism. That was on a Tuesday. 5 days later, Nadal Hassan killed 14 people at Fort Hood, only to find out that the FBI knew that he had at least 14 emails with Anwar al-Awlaki that were never investigated because they could not investigate suspicious activity. Why did they miss the guy in Orlando? Why did they miss the people at the Boston Marathon? Why did they miss those things? So when I look at you and say, your president and this administration is refusing to protect you and your children and your families because they're tying the hands of federal law enforcement people, it's true. It's true. And it is time that we understand that we're vulnerable because the administration will not stand up to these people.
Yeah, I want to say 3 things. This is great. Some of you may be familiar with Philip Haney, who left the DHS about 6 months ago, and he's been on the circuit speaking and on national news. And I've known Philip for quite a while when he was still in. And he did a lot of the work. He came to the same conclusions I did inside DHS based on his investigations. But to Jerry's point about that, he was ordered by supervisors at DHS to remove hundreds of names of individuals and organizations who had direct ties to terrorism. And part of the landslide that happened was because when the president of the Islamic Society of North America at the time, who was a female from Canada named Ingrid Mattson, was coming back into the United States because of information he had put into the system about ISNA being, per evidence, in the largest Hamas trial in American history. The evidence showed that ISNA is not only a Muslim Brotherhood entity, which the federal government acknowledged in official court pleadings, it was directly funding Hamas, a designated terrorist organization. And when she got stopped by DHS at the airport and they moved her to secondarily screen her, she called her place of employment, which was the White House. And so as it trickled down, she was one of the many people he was ordered. Now he has officially testified publicly now. Before he came out into the public about this, he had sat with members of the Intelligence and Judiciary Committee and testified. But who's been arrested at DHS for this? Who has been fired for this? Nobody. That's number one. The other thing that Jerry said, every one of these attacks you have seen in the last several years, you can go back to 9/11, the Islamic Center of Southern California, Muslim Brotherhood Hamas Center, the Fort Pierce Islamic Center, Orlando, and the Islamic Center that the San Bernardino folks were attending were both Tablighi Jamaat. Now that may mean nothing to you, but they are an Islamic movement working directly with the Muslim Brotherhood right here in the United States. The very group that Philip Haney was tracking and those mosques that he had identified. You see, but he was shut down. This is real stuff. Every one of these things, the Boston bombers, Islamic Society of Boston, subsidiary of Islamic Society of North America, been briefed for years that that is a jihadi center, founded, by the way, by an Al-Qaeda guy who is in prison right now, named Abdurrahman al-Amoudi. So you can go to each one of these attacks. The Islamic Society of Chattanooga produced the guy who went and killed 4 Marines and a Navy sailor at 2 recruiting locations. We can go on and on with this. So these are 2 huge points. And the final point is, you know, in 1948 to 1950, the most significant ideologue for the Muslim Brotherhood, besides its founder, Said Qutb, was at the University of Colorado in Greeley. Do you know that Anwar al-Awlaki, who was the leader of Al-Qaeda in Yemen and the most prolific recruiter for Al-Qaeda until we killed him with a missile in 2011, was the president of the Muslim Students Association at Colorado State University. Najibul Azazi, who was working with 2 very, very senior Al-Qaeda guys who were killed by drone strikes, he goes to New York City because they have a plot to blow up 12 simultaneous suicide bombers, subways and landmarks. And this has all been entered, cases closed in federal court. He's in prison. He's from Aurora, Colorado. And then you've got the Buena Vista training camp from Jamaat al-Fuqra. And by the way, the Islamic Society of Colorado Springs, which is Muslim Brotherhood, you know who owns the property? The North American Islamic Trust on Chestnut Street here in Colorado Springs. I think it's 2125, but my memory might be fading. Owned by the North American Islamic Trust, which the federal court, the federal government, the Department of Justice said is essentially the bank for the Muslim Brotherhood and also directly funds Hamas. And yet they're still operating. And they own that property. And by the way, it's not the only property they own in Colorado, but we'll just stick to that for now. And who outreaches to them? Well, your mayor does. Churches do. So what are we doing, right? The assumption has to be, if you understand what Kamal said about what Islam is, you have to understand the Muslim Brotherhood. They're not the ones who are deciding not to abide by the Sharia. They are absolutely abiding. So if it's an Islamic center or Islamic society that they control, it's going to keep producing these people. And that's what I think you need to understand, I believe.
The scary part is right now, Islam in America is at low point. Right now, they are being peaceful, but with this immigration thing, it's going to accelerate the new level. And so and when we come to understand the people that they are bringing to the United States of America, a lot of them, they said they are Syrian refugees, but a lot of them are not. They're from Africa, from North Africa, from different places, from all over the Middle East. When Ben Carson went to visit the refugees in Jordan, he came with a report. In his report, he said that the refugees don't want any help from the United States of America. The refugees blame the United States of America and Israel for everything else. These are the Muslim refugees. And the last, the small group, they said Iran. They blame it on Iran. That's this 3 blames. So he said, how can we help you? They said, we don't want your help. We don't want to even come to the United States of America. So you go like, why are we bringing refugees in here? And who are these refugees? And how will they start changing the culture? When these refugees start in and they go to specific area, no-go zone area, and they start establishing that stronghold, we will not be able to enter that zoning because it's a holy ground. You have to bring an imam to enter with the police or with the military. If you look what's happening in France right now, they have several hundred no-go zone area. The Muslim no longer want to abide by the French constitution. They no longer want to be part of the culture. Many of them, they are coming in legally and moving into no-go zone area. The highest drug rate, the highest murder, and weapon galore. Every year, they burn thousands of cars all over the place, and they destroy city after city. To the point right now, the police not sure whether they're going to go into a civil war. What we are going into, it's a dangerous time, and we're coming to a place where we really need to vote, because this current administration is dangerous. And not just dangerous, if you understand, if Hillary got elected, and I'm saying Hillary.
Crooked Hillary.
Yes. If she got elected, she said she's bringing 750,000 refugees. That's over the 100,000 refugees that she'll bring every year, which is American legal limit. So that'll be 1,000,000.55, altogether. But this is not the scary part. The scary part is her right-hand woman. Her name is Huma Abedin. Huma Abedin is a radical. They have ties to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Muslim Brotherhood. Her father, her mother, her brother, all of them are involved. And she is the right hand of Hillary. Think what would happen to America, and think what would happen to the church, and think what will happen to our conservative move, and how America will be reshaped, and the hate crime bill, which is UN 1416, will be implemented. Now you could not say anything. You'll be thrown in prison and you will be penalized financially. And now America will be changing, going to the place where Reagan said the day will come about when we start telling our children how great America used to be.
Now let me say this.
Hey, Pastor, if I could, just 15 seconds. Today, Paul Sperry published an article on Huma Abedin that, nails it. And it's the first time that he got a call back from Mrs. Clinton's campaign communications director, because he hit pay dirt on exactly what you're talking about, Huma Abedin. She's been navigating rough waters and kind of taking some rounds, but he nails it, and they know it. And so she can't hide in the shadows anymore. She is, what he just said is absolutely correct. Her whole family, but she is much more involved than just being a family member of Muslim Brothers.
And Paul Sperry, let's just be clear. Paul Sperry is an investigative reporter that has written, and he's a real investigator, and he has written numerous books about Islamic terrorism, like the Muslim Mafia and Islam and terrorism. Infiltration. So he's a very credible guy that wrote this article.
To the OIC, Organization Islamic Conference. This is the most dangerous conference in the world today. They are trying to change the world and bring Islamization, one world order under Allah, which is called Ummah. This is her connection to Hillary, the OIC and Hillary through Huma Abedin. If Hillary got elected, with the millions of dollars that she got from Saudi, from UAE, from Kuwait, from all those Muslim countries, guess what she's going to do? She's going to be their ambassador.
This is why, if anybody in this nation ought to be having these conversations, I think it ought to be in the church, because the church is not talking about this stuff. Now, Y'all have had a baptism of stuff, but I just want to say our God is greater. Our God is greater. This is a spiritual battle, and we do not wage war. We're not fighting for victory. I like to say we're fighting from victory. And I was not texting a while ago. I was looking for a scripture in case y'all were wondering. Joshua chapter 2, because I bet they thought, look at him up there answering text and emails. But actually, Joshua 2, you remember when they went in to possess the land and they took the walls of Jericho and they met up with Rahab, and she says, I know the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. We've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did unto the 2 kings of the Amorites. See, this is the warring people that God's trying to raise up. There is an army of God rising right now. I'm going to share that from my book. There is an army of God rising. We're everywhere, and some don't even know who they're in the army yet. Ezekiel's valley of dry bones. The Lord's like, can these bones live? Well, you know, Lord. Well, prophesy to them, speak to them. Some pastors might say, that's my congregation, valleys of dry bones. Yeah. That where you got to start speaking to them life. And so he says here, and as soon as we heard these things, our hearts did melt. You don't need to be afraid. We don't need to be afraid of them. They need to be afraid of us when we get in to where we're supposed to be in Christ. We don't hate people. We don't hate people, but we're in a spiritual battle. But I kind of went all over because we haven't really even scratched the surface of this. And let me just share this and we'll have some closing thoughts. We're kind of on tomorrow morning you're going to hear each of these men. General Boykin is going to talk about our military under siege. You need to hear where our military is right now. I think we're pre-World War II. It's very serious what has happened to our military men, and here's a man that deserves the right to be heard, and I believe he carries his Constitution with him, and he's told us before, he reads it often, and he said, I swore to uphold and defend. All you military swore an oath, and he doesn't have an expiration date on that. We've got to get the word out into the church, and then John is going to talk about Islamic infiltration. They're going to be unbridled. They're going to be able to just take it line upon line. And then Kamal's going to share some very important things. We put one thing down, but I think he's got another thing on his heart. It has to do with these refugees. But the thing that we've got to do is praying's good. We got people praying. We pray. But we've got to begin to do some things. And so in this last 10 minutes, I'd kind of like you guys to maybe think of things on your heart that while we're all here together tonight and as the week gets underway, what would you want to say? What are some of the most important things we need to hear?
I want to reinforce something you said. In the last week, I have engaged so many Christians that have said, I'm not going to vote. And this is what I say to them. Who were you supporting? Well, I was supporting Ted Cruz or Rubio or Huckabee. I said, did you campaign with them? No. How much money did you put in their campaign? Well, I prayed for them. Okay, you prayed for them. You prayed. And God didn't give you what you asked for, right? The Bible says God raises up kings and rulers. He did not give you the option. I campaigned with Ted Cruz. I put money in Ted Cruz's campaign. I did all I could. I prayed diligently for Ted Cruz, but I don't have the choice now of voting for Ted Cruz. This is a matter of stewardship. God gave us this country. You talked about it tonight. He breathed life into this country. When He gives you resources, when He gives you wealth, you're responsible to be a good steward, right? It's the same way with this country. Not voting is a lack of stewardship, and you are wrong. I don't care if you write a name in, but not voting in this election, I believe you are wrong from a biblical perspective. And if you want a real expert, read Wayne Grudem's piece on this issue. It is a great explanation of why you as Christians must go vote and tell every Christian you know you're wrong not to vote. Okay, thank you. I'm done.
So I do have something. I think that was I appreciate the opportunity to share that, what's on my heart. If you look at what Islam teaches and what Allah says and what Muhammad says, in the most authoritative hadith, it says that the Muslims will fight the Jews and kill them. The rocks and trees will cry out, "O Muslim, there's a Jew behind me, come kill him." Yes. And it says that when Jesus returns, the Islamic prophet Jesus, because for those of you not aware, when Allah gave the law of Moses to Moses, those who didn't follow it were lost. When Allah gave the evangel to Isa, Jesus, those who didn't follow it were lost. And when he gave the Quran to Muhammad, those who didn't follow it were lost. Which is why you can't take Christians and Jews as your friends if you're a Muslim. And that's why the Quran says it. That's why Allah said it. And from Islam's perspective, there is no such thing today as the original law of Moses or what we call the New Testament. That was all corrupted by the Jews and the Christians. So what we use as our Bible is not authentic. So what you got to do is you got to take archaeological, historical reality and just toss it out the window to believe what they're saying. But when I teach law enforcement, we talk like this. And I tell them, this is not a religion class. Let's just do Logic 101. Can the same Jesus that said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," yes, I am the Son of God. I am. And no one goes to the Father except through me. Can that be the same Jesus who says, "I'm coming back to cast you into hell and kill all the Jews for not converting to Islam"? That's authoritative Islam from Bukhari, the most authoritative Islamic scholar for hadith in Islam. It's gold. It's the gold standard in Islam. So can that be the same Jesus? Can it be the same God who says you have to obliterate all the Jews? Can that be the same God who said, "You're my chosen people"? See, that baby knows. That baby knows that's not true, right? Can that be the same God? And the answer is no. And so when you understand that what Islam teaches is when we build bridges, when they build bridges, it's a one-way bridge. They say the bridge is to bring the people of unbelief to Islam. They're not outreaching for any other purpose. And by the way, they're called to outreach, they're called to do dawah before they wage jihad. It's a legal requirement, and it's all about the Sharia. But I believe if we're people of faith, we also know, you said something I love, we're fighting from victory to victory. But it's not enough to fight against something. I believe we have to fight for something. Yes. And our founders said, and if I might, if Bill Feder and David Barton would allow me to step out, our founders said that no law can be legislated that violates the law of nature, and the law of nature's God. And that was legally defined, as Holy Scripture. That's what we were founded on. And we built a government. We gave up our right to self-government to create a government whose primary duty was secure the liberties, the inalienable rights, and there aren't just three of them. Among these inalienable rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then from that, we create a government that creates laws that don't violate the law of nature or the law of nature's God, Scripture. And then we build a community that's built in liberty, and from that we get the most prosperous nation in the history of the world because it's based on Scripture and the law of nature, which is the will of God. And when we pull that away, there's no place for it to go but collapsing. We the people are the government. And so a challenge I would offer you, as well as joy, is, man, what a time to be alive. We get to engage this. And so I want to tell you, I don't think this is a dark time. In the darkest dark, one light makes more light than, right?
Amen.
That's the encouragement.
I believe we are living the finest hour of the church life. I think the next 10 years is going to be the finest time in the Christian history. You know, what I'm looking at everything that we're seeing, the Word of God says we are not of this world. So when we are looking at this, the world of God and our world, you know, there are two different places. As I was reading this morning in my time with the Lord, I read from the book of Matthew. He said, many will come to me and say, Lord, Lord, in your name we did this, this, and that, and the other. He said, depart from me, I did not know you, because of one thing. You did not know the will of my Father. You did not do the will of my Father. I think our civic duty as we are from that kingdom, if we are from the kingdom of heaven, then we need to act from the kingdom of heaven. We could not be acting from the kingdom of this world, meaning we have to provoke the darkness. When God spoke His light, it's specifically to provoke the darkness. When God sent His Son, it's to provoke the darkness. When God created His community, it's to provoke the darkness. Our time is not here by mistake. When you look at yourself, say, what is my doing? What is your will for me, O Father, that I may do? Because your sphere of influence is very important. And when you look at your influence sphere, Brother Andrew spoke about it today. The mountain that we speak from is not the mountain of religion. We speak from the mountain of God. The mountain of God surpasses all mountains. And when we reach into the God, His place, into His throne, He said, if I am in you and you are in me, ask anything in my name and I'll give it to you. And to live is Christ and to die is gain. The time has come for the soldiers to stand and make the difference and say, for me and my house, we will worship the Lord. This is by choice, because I believe some of us will not be judged by Jesus Christ because we will never come to that place. We'll go to a different place. We're either operating from the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of hell. You could not deceive God. You could not mock God. We're coming to the place where you have to say, Lord, it is you. And you have to cast your vote. You have to do something, because it's not for you. It's not for you. If you look at yourself, we're gonna expire soon. But our future generation, their promise, their inheritance, their heritage, their value, their glory, all of it lies right here. Right here. What we decide today, the future will be made by our decision today. So choose right.
Amen. Hallelujah. Glory to God.